I know we're really excited to be able to be with you all here virtually today, and I'm really looking forward to this session. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we have the presentation all set to go. And then we can just, dive right in. So again, thank you again all for being here. I think today, as we think about some of the goals for meeting with you, we certainly are excited to share a lot about what's going on the state level as it relates to civics education, and then also share, what we as an organization have been championing for the past 10 years as a national organization. So really, yeah, our focus for today is all around that idea of achieving civic readiness and educating for what we see as a participatory and reflective democracy. First, I want to just take a quick step back and start with some introductions for who will be presenting with me today. So I'll start off with myself. My name is Martin Mintz. I'm the program manager for New York. So in my role, I'm working with educators around New York State, both within the school district level and the individual school level to both train and support the educators who are implementing our Action Civics curriculum. Really excited to be with you all today. I think I'll next pass it off to Jessica.
Thanks, Martin. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jessica Wise. I'm the Senior Program Associate at GC, and in my role, I support educators in implementing the curriculum as well as facilitating trainings and different professional developments. And pass to Denora.
Hi, everyone. I'm Denora Gatacho. I'm the New York Executive Director at Generation Citizen, and I'm so glad to be in conversation with all of you today.
Awesome. Great. So yeah, I think we'll just start off with a quick moment to all reflect. There's going to be 3 questions that we just posted up on the screen, and would love for you all to just take a minute, review the questions, and would love to have you share to at least a response to at least one of these questions. Share a response into the chat, the group chat, and would also, for responding to a specific question, just add the number you're responding. So if I'm answering question 1, I would put 1 and then my response. So question 1 being, how would you describe the current state of civic engagement in New York? Question 2, how would you describe the state of your students' civic engagement, either from past semesters or, as we go into this school year, what you might think or know about that? And then the third question has to do with what resources or tools you feel you might need to support your students' civic engagement. Great, so I'm already seeing some answers coming in, but yeah, we'll give about a minute. I'll do some read alouds as they come in. But so seeing at the beginning stages, teachers are focused on testing. They focus on content, not civics. Yep, civic engagement on the back burner as a result. Yep. So lacking for question number 1, seeing the state of civic engagement as lacking, but hopefully on the upswing. And yes, Jessica, definitely varies depending on the area, the district, the teacher, for sure. Oh, interesting from Jenny. My students see civic engagement as something that has to happen on a national level. My goal is to help them start with their school and community. Jenny, that makes my heart sing. Yes, I totally agree with that. Yeah, moving forward, students are not given the opportunity to actually engage. So it's more talking about civic engagement than actually doing the civic engagement. Oftentimes feels like a checklist of things to do before graduation and not intrinsically motivating. Yeah. So in terms of what people might need, more resources on how to connect with community-based organizations. Yep. Vicky, sad face. Thank you. Not a happy face. And Stephanie, for number 1, a small amount are deeply engaged, but most are not engaged or quietly engaged. Interesting. And then for your students, about half are engaged, half are not. Great. So yeah, so would love, please keep these responses rolling in. But just from hearing all of this, it's really interesting to have to hear your responses. It definitely resonates a lot with who we are as an organization and why we exist. I think as it relates to both the state of civic engagement in our state and our communities, but also as it relates to how young people have opportunities to engage around civics and their own civic identities in school settings. So what opportunities are they given? What opportunities are missing as they go through the education process? Civics education, from a couple things that you all brought up already, thinking about how often it's had to take the back burner to maybe state tests, things like that. And often feels like you're checking a box versus actual real meaningful engagement that can lead to some more lifelong civic changes. But yes, thank you all so much for sharing your thoughts on those. Really, that made me super excited to kind of jump in a little bit further for the rest of the day. So we'll take this time just to really quickly go over the agenda for the day. We're going to start off actually with a discussion with our executive director, Denora. And in that, we'll really focus on Generation Citizen and really what is the state of civic engagement in New York. To your points already, I can hear that you already have some thoughts and ideas around that. And then we'll also have a chance to dig into what's going on with the Civic Readiness Initiative in New York. And after that discussion, there will be some time for some Q&A. So if you have any questions, we're opening the floor up as well, so that not just me asking Denora questions, but I would love for you to as well. I ask her questions all the time. The second, we'll be looking really at how all this connects to the work that we're doing within schools and within school districts around the state. So really looking at Generation Citizens Action Civics Pedagogy. And then ending up the session looking at some strategies and more specifically resources that you all as educators can use to foster civic engagement in your own communities. And then we'll also end the entire session with another Q&A that can kind of relate to connecting all these dots. And before we jump in, just want to review a few norms. I'm sure these might not be new to you, but just a few things. Ask that you do stay muted when you're not speaking, just so that we can reduce some background noise if it happens to come up. Also, if possible, we encourage you to keep your video on. Just really encourages interaction between all of us. Definitely that we hope that you all will share your expertise with one another. I know we all come to this meeting with our own set of skills and expertise and experiences, and ask that you bring those with you. Also, I know I mentioned that there is going to be Q&As to really have time to speak to any questions you might have. But also throughout the session, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat function as well, and we'll do our best to get to those. And then also, I guess going off of that, always we support exploring new ideas and asking questions, specifically for that Q&A session, whatever makes the most sense for you. If it's coming off mute and sharing that way, or just dropping it in the chat, we'll be monitoring the chat throughout this as well. And then also, as it happens in this new virtual world, we welcome any type of pet life partners joining us on the screen as it may happen. But yes, so let's, I guess, to jump right back into why we're here today. So kind of the overview of what we're focusing on is really, again, as many of you brought up in our initial reflection, New York does have a civic participation problem on the state level, but also as we look into our communities and school communities. And what Generation Citizen focuses on is what that looks like, and the root cause, or one of the root causes being really on the education level, and the idea about how through state-mandated participation government and civics course, it certainly aims to engage students in this political process. As many of you have brought up already, civics education is not being prioritized in our schools as is, and the learning standards really don't provide ways to really go beyond what we see as like almost a passive form of receiving information towards civic skills and agency development. So when we think about the types of ways that students are engaging in civic learning, it's that passive receiving of information, learning about the branches, how it works, and not looking at how they are a part of the civic process. So in this session, we'll really look at exploring the steps that New York is taking to, certainly address these inequities in civics education and ensure that students are attaining civic readiness prior to graduating from a New York City or New York State school. And from that, we're going to then explore Generation Citizens Action Civics pedagogy, which is really at the heart of why we do what we do. So we'll certainly get into that, but the high level is that it is a student-centered experiential approach to developing civic skills, knowledge, and dispositions on the individual level that prepare students for 21st century democratic practice. So with that, I would love to just engage in a quick virtual chat with Dinora, who, she introduced herself, but she is our Executive Director for GC New York, and myself, GC New York's Program Manager. So with that, hello, Dinora. It's good to see you again. And just would love to kind of kick this off with, would love to hear a little bit from you about GC and the state of civic engagement in New York.
Hey, Martin, how are you? Good to see you. And the backdrop at the WeWork, it looks like you're in a real office, so it's taking us back to a special place, a different time when we all went to work in offices. And thank you all for being here today. It's great to be in conversation with you all about the state of civics and the path going forward. Such a good question, and one that, at least even looking at the responses in the chat, I have so many different directions I'd love to take this conversation, but I know we're time limited. But what I would say is, in this moment, right, as educators, you all are feeling what we know to be the case and the reason why Generation Citizens exists, right? We are living through this civic and racial reckoning, right? And it's pulsing, especially for young people. I want to pause there because we often talk about it in the context of the civic reckoning, which I think we all have realized has been happening for a fair amount of time. I'm coming up on my 4-year anniversary with Generation Citizen, and I like to say I've lived through an entire federal election cycle, and it feels like the need for civics education couldn't be greater. But yet we said that in 2016, and we said that in 2008, and we keep saying it, and yet we haven't quite cracked the code. We are also living through a racial reckoning, right? Young people in particular really see the inequities and injustices in our society, and they are marching and protesting in the streets about that, right? I saw some comments in the chat about wearing t-shirts and not necessarily connecting the dots to how that is related to civic action. So I want to talk about that. And then we also are not talking about, and I would not be true to myself, and unfortunately, neither Greg would be happy to have me here if I didn't say we're living through a gender reckoning, and we're not really talking about that, right? Like, this is also a historic moment as we think about the elections happening at the federal level, opportunities in this year where we're celebrating the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, to really think about how young people can harness their civic power. And so that is, to me, the power of Generation Citizen, right? So we are this 10-year-old national nonprofit that is focused on educating and empowering young people to be civically engaged, right? We've been doing that across the country in 6 regional hubs, where we work directly with educators like yourselves who are teaching at the middle and high school level, really putting civics education back into the hands of teachers, empowering them to help young people demystify democracy and really understand the nuts and bolts of how it works. I use that word demystify democracy very specifically because I think even for all of us, democracy is such a complex term, right? It's a complex political construct. And we often aren't talking about how best to engage with democracy in order to affect change on the systemic issues we care about. And so Generation Citizen was founded 10 years ago with that very goal, right? To go from this notion of Schoolhouse Rock, or I'm just a bill on Capitol Hill, if you will, to how do you teach young people the knowledge, the skills they need to participate actively in democracy, but more important than that, allow them to have a sense of civic agency. And so we work using a pedagogy we call Action Civics, which really is designed to make it experiential, student-led, project-based, really put the young people in the driver's seat of their own civic experience, grounded in a middle or high school classroom. We've been doing that work, like I said, for 10 years around the country, 9 years here in New York. And what I see in this moment is that there is such energy around the importance of civics education, and yet we still need more resources to help teachers understand how to teach this new and exciting pedagogy. And so I'm excited that we're doing this work and that you all are here eager to learn about it. This is one of many conversations that I, Martin, Jess, and some of our colleagues have had to talk about the state of civic engagement in New York. Another comment I would love to address, if I can, Martin, without taking all the time up, is this notion of voting feeling like it's a federal thing, right? It's a thing you do on election day. be it, 3 times a year in New York, or in other states, maybe more or less frequently, depending on their system. At Generation Citizen, we always talk about the engagement with politics being a local issue, right? Like, how do you really think about what's happening in your neighborhood, in your school community, in your greater boroughs, or in your counties and your cities, and think about how you start there, right? When we all think about our daily lives, especially in this moment, everything that affects our daily lives, or by and large, most things that affect our daily lives, are happening and decided by state and local government. And so our curriculum really is designed to teach young people that. Like, how do they actually access the local power? How do they map out who the decision makers are? How do they contact them and actually get into the political process, not the partisan process, but the political process of understanding how democracy works? And then how do they leverage that to advocate for change on issues they care about?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Dinora. And I think that definitely, when you think about the idea of local politics, we use that word community a lot in GC's curriculum, and certainly schools and students. I think one thing that makes Action Civics so exciting to see is that it is so student driven, and really thinking about that word community. Students get to decide: are we talking about our classroom community, school community, neighborhood, street, city, whatever you consider your local community. At GC, we focus on the students do work on the local politics, whether that's state or anything lower than that. But I think, having the idea of community being front and center is crucial. And we'd love to, I think, Dinora, you were talking about kind of the energy around civics education in general right now, but also the need for resources to kind of meet that. And would love to, as someone who was a part of the Civic Readiness Task Force, would love to hear a little bit more about your experience on that and what's going on currently.
Yeah, absolutely. I will say affirmatively, just to tie a bow around the last question and segue to this one. What I feel in this moment is that the state of our civic engagement in New York is that it's strong, right? Like, New York is in this moment where it can be in the vanguard of states nationwide that is really helping to drive a 21st century civic standard. And what do I mean by that? You're like, Dinora, you just said a lot of things and it sounds really wonky. Tell me what that means for me as an educator. So yeah, I'm gonna do that. I had the opportunity to serve on a statewide task force that the New York State Education Department convened to help define civic readiness in New York. So as a part of their federal plan to ensure that every student succeeds and comply with the Every Student Succeeds Act, New York included this College Career and Civic Readiness Index in their plan, which was approved by the federal government. In connection with that, right, that's a very lofty term. What does it mean to be college, career, or civic ready? So I'll take the last piece because that's where our expertise lies. They appointed a task force that I had the pleasure of being an appointee to really think about, what does civic readiness mean in New York? What would it take? What attitudes, mindsets, knowledge, skills, behaviors, activities would need to be imparted to young people as they go through the K-12 system in New York to make sure that they graduate civic ready? And that's a high standard, right? I mean, it's one that didn't necessarily exist prior to this. Many states, including Illinois, Florida, Kentucky, others have begun to dip their toes into these waters and think about defining civic readiness and taking steps towards making sure that there's civic pedagogy happening in schools. But New York, by putting this marker down about civic readiness, really went a step beyond that. And so the work of the task force was to really put the meat on the bones, if you will, and define what civic readiness means in the 21st century, right? Like, for many of you, what I've seen in the comments is like, your students are not distinguishing between protest and civic activism that is happening in the streets, if you will, or even on the internet using social media, between how do they move towards long-term systemic change. Like, I'm not going to steal Jess and Martin's thunder. They're going to tell you all about Action Civics and they're going to get deep up in that. But what I would say to you in this moment is, that is the work that we need to be doing. We need to teach young people that civic engagement isn't just voting, even though I've got this lovely vote mug and I'm on brand for the next 47 days about voting. That is key, but you need to do more than that, right? It is the spectrum of activity. It is really thinking about systemic policy change. And so that was what we used as our frame through the task force, was like, how do we go further? How do we go deeper? And so what we did was not only define civic readiness as this sense of the set of mindsets, skills, behaviors that students need to acquire before they graduate from high school. They also, need to be able to think about the Regents wanted us to go a step further and think about a seal of civic readiness, right? So a diploma seal that students would be eligible to achieve if they met the relevant criteria. And so, what we decided as a way to think about how to incentivize students to go beyond just the core civic knowledge that they're acquiring in schools is what would it look like for districts to be able to incentivize students to participate in meaningful civic engagement projects, thinking about kind of the work that we do at Generation Citizen and Action Civics. We proposed this civic readiness seal, diploma seal, and it is a great step in the right direction, right? If students are eligible to achieve it, they will have completed all the requisite subject matter that is required of students before they graduate in the social studies strand, as well as offer students an opportunity to complete a capstone as a way to achieve the seal. And we think that's a great step in the right direction, but we believe that in order for that to actually be meaningful and robust as they intend it to be, the Department of Education has to go further. There has to be professional development for educators to ensure that they understand how to support students with achieving this capstone. There needs to be an equitable implementation of the seal of civic readiness around the state. So it can't just be districts that are well-resourced and historically have prioritized civics education will continue to do that to the disadvantage of other districts. And there needs to be a comprehensive way for supporting students to move this forward and not have it feel like it's a burden on teachers to support 30 students in a classroom with each doing their own capstone. I'm gonna ask my colleague Jess if she doesn't mind just putting in the chat. We put out a white paper that talks in more detail about our recommendations around this seal of civic readiness, which actually would, I won't drone on with my own response on this, but it will at least give you an overview of our thinking and why we think this is a great recommendation to move forward when, we get back to closer to normal again, right? Obviously, as we all know in this moment, there are so many priorities for our school system. And the sense that we have in this moment is that the Regents are going to delay the implementation of the pilot program that was supposed to take effect this year to go into effect during the 21-22 school year. And then moving forward, they will, wide scale implement this seal option in the 22-23 school year, which feels like a really long time from now, but it isn't. So I'll pause there and happy to answer any questions on that or go deeper if you need me to, Martin.
So that's super helpful to hear. Thank you, Denora. I know there will be, in a few minutes, we can open it up to the floor for anybody else who might have some questions. But, I think definitely would highlight to take a look at that white paper. I think it's, super, thank you, Jesse. I just dropped into the chat. And, as you speak about, what is needed for all of this, both as it relates to, the Civic Readiness Initiative and the seal, would love to hear from you. I know you touched on kind of what are some next steps for the initiative, but in your opinion, like what do all these changes mean for school communities, for teachers, for the students that are a part of that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great step forward for school communities and teachers because it is a commitment by the New York State Education Department that they want districts to be prioritizing this work. And that they want to have students actually be engaging in the practice of civic engagement and not just participation in government as usual, right? So not just memorizing the branches of government and reading a little bit of current events and news and hoping that we all will now therefore be civically engaged and civic minded. So I do think it's a great step forward. What will be incumbent on districts to figure out is one, how do they support students and educators with implementing this, right, at the grassroots level? Because the reality is many teachers statewide don't have experience with doing project-based learning and really supporting students either individually or collectively, the way we do at Generation Citizen, with completing these capstone projects. And so each district is actually going to be in a position to have to recommend the criteria through which the capstone projects will move forward and how best to rank and score these civic capstone projects and actually be, giving approval for the seal itself. And so I think that's going to be a big hurdle for districts to understand and engage with, as well as how best to integrate this, be it in the social studies strand, which is where the State Education Department initially recommends it be implemented, and then what would it look like to implement it through an interdisciplinary approach. Awesome. And as we say in the white paper, which I'm going to attach here too, because Jess shared like an overview of the initiative, and I'll share our paper, which gives more in-depth recommendations about diploma seals. We are unequivocally on the side of educators in this regard. Like, we don't want this to be an unfunded mandate. We don't want this to be a new requirement hanging over the heads of educators, especially in this disrupted educational environment. So there's got to be intentional professional development on how to make the shift and really support students with all students with, you know, all the various learning needs to be able to achieve this seal.
Awesome. Thank you, Denora. And I think that might be the perfect segue to really to open it up to everybody in the room. So I know Denora shared a lot of really interesting information, and it also relates to some next steps. Would love to open it up to just to do maybe 5 to 10 minutes of a Q&A specifically around this specific aspect of the presentation. We are, I think, a relatively small group, so if you feel comfortable just unmuting yourself and asking that way, that works. But we're also monitoring the chat, and I can elevate questions as well as they come in. So for right now, I'll take a pause and really open the floor up to anybody who might have some questions for Denora.
Thinking about the moment that we're in and how there's this great emphasis on social emotional learning. Do you want to maybe expand a little bit on your thought process on how community-oriented civics really offers an opportunity to just build that aspect of classroom community, when teachers are really trying to think about and struggle with how to connect with kids? How might you think you could maybe do that in like a virtual space? If you could talk a little bit about that, or what your expertise is on that, please.
I'm thinking that's a question directed more at you than it is, or you and Jess, Martin, than it is at me, the pedagogical experts.
Yeah, certainly happy to kind of share some thoughts around that. One thing that we see within Generation Citizen, obviously Denora spoke a lot about, as it relates to the civic learning. We see a lot of what's happening inside of our classrooms to have to do with social emotional learning, developing those soft skills, but also developing a sense of community. We really focus on something that we call a democratic classroom culture, which I'm sure, at least in process, is quite familiar to many teachers, but it's about decentering the educator as the sole holder of information and really diving into students, their own lived experiences, and their own communities as those who are also holders of information. I'll speak to one specific aspect of the curriculum when, when students, I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but when students land on an issue that they want to take on, they go through a process of participatory action research, which, when I hear research, as a former educator myself, I think, okay, let's find out what the experts say. What's really exciting about participatory action research is that it also puts students, their lived experiences, and their community members in that expert level of work. So, students choose an issue that's affecting their community, they're also experts in that. So really thinking about how you frame a student and the power that framing can have on both how they look at themselves, how they look at their communities, but then also the skills that they can develop during this process as it relates to, you have soft skills such as, being able to speak with somebody that you might not necessarily agree with, or thinking about how this can relate to how students are developing, their public speaking skills, but really thinking about, especially as we, start this school year when, the idea of creating community, certainly seems quite different, if not quite daunting, as we head into the fall, but really see the tools that the Generation Citizen frames community and frames the individual student as a part of that community as being, really, is essential as we head into this school year. And Jess or Donna, anything to add to that? And then I saw a note from Jessica, helpful to think about the SEL benchmarks, cultural responsive sustaining ed framework, and the civic readiness initiatives are all under the ESSA educating the whole child model. Yep, these all work together, complement and depend on each other. That's a great point. Thank you, Jessica.
This might be for Denora to a degree, but just listening to what everyone's saying and thinking about, you know, the addition of this to New York's ESSA plan, I think about the work I do with building principals and assistant superintendents, where sometimes where things are added feel like another thing. But mentioning, I can't remember whose quote you just read from the chat, how we might think about civic participation as an umbrella, like, right, what's the umbrella and what's the piece? So I think educators need some time to sort through that interrelationship, because we just haven't had a lot of time to think about how they work together. It just seems like it's bam, 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 and you don't have any time to process the interconnectivity and what that might look like. I hear that a lot, and I feel it as well.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I thank you for raising that, Stephanie. I think it's both the interconnectivity between social emotional learning, which, right, you know, it has become, and I'm not saying this in a glib way as a non-educator, but like the hot topic, the hot fuzzy word to phrase to say, as a parent of 2 young children. I get that, especially in this moment. And then I think about this moment that we're living in, right, where young people are witnessing all of this change and this disruption happening around them, to them, and they also don't have the lexicon to talk about it. I think what's powerful about the Civic Readiness Initiative is that it is, like I said, a bold step by the State Education Department to move the conversation forward. What isn't often talked about when you think about the definition of civic readiness, and I'm not going to get all lawyerly wonky on you, but is that there is so much more integration in the development of 21st century education skills and life and workforce skills that all young people need, right? So if you said to a teacher, back to the whole child and SEL approach, you can teach civics in a history class, or you can teach it in this social studies class, or in this ELA class, or sometimes even we have teachers teaching it in a science class. But what you're really doing is teaching young people critical thinking skills, how to present better arguments, how to research their problem. Those are skills that any educator is trying to develop in a classroom, right, at a certain level, developmentally appropriate level. But instead, you're right, it feels like this idea off on the side that you're going to layer into your pedagogy without a connection to what you're already doing, right? So I think it's part of the work that we try to do at Generation Citizen, where when Martin and Jess are talking to educators, is actually breaking down those barriers and really thinking about the connectivity that you highlighted, Stephanie, between this and the pedagogy and the work that you're already doing in your classroom, so that it doesn't feel like another thing. It is integral to what's happening, and I will get legally wonky in this respect, is core, right, to our education system, right? Like the founding of our public education system in America was actually grounded in teaching young people about democracy. And then we could do all the other things, right? And over time, that has evolved. And I think in some respects, what hurts me is that we've lost sight of that. Because democracy is a complex political construct. I often call it a full contact sport, right? And if we don't actually teach young people how to participate, we can't wag our fingers at them when they don't participate, right? So I think your point is well taken, and that more has to be done both by NYSED and groups like us to make sure that we're not making it feel burdensome for educators, especially in this moment when I can only imagine my kids were physically at school this morning, and then one of them didn't feel well, knock on wood, and like now they're home, and I'm like, wait, I have to get you online and do all these things, and it boggles the mind. So I appreciate all of you for what you're doing, and our goal here is not to make it feel like civics education is the one more thing, if you will. And Martin, and Jess, feel free to add anything or clarify anything I didn't state as articulately as I could have.
Yeah, I think I'll actually, so Brian brought up a really important point that I definitely think I want to elevate to the whole group. He said, you know, there's also this noticeable gap in expertise among social studies teachers between history and government. Most teachers don't have a lot of public policy and or political science training in their backgrounds because New York State is focused primarily on history. And that is something that I think, you know, we at Generation Citizen are super aware of and also see ourselves as a huge role that we play when working with our educators, is being almost like a connector between these. And I think you certainly can't expect educators to be experts on every single, you know, we talk about the importance of local politics, which, you know, I think remains true, but we also can't expect every educator to then inform themselves on every issue, on every topic that their students might engage with. Because, you know, that's part of like their own experience of learning and finding out more. But also as it relates to the support needed by educators. You know, this work inherently being student-centered, being project-based, you know, you're not ever going to be 100% sure which direction it's going to take. So really thinking about how we as an organization can support and continue to support educators in making those connections and building up that knowledge. I'm just going to re-highlight. So Jessica just wrote, I love this framing, but social emotional learning is the plate. Civic engagement is part of the plate. Without self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, we can't get to responsible decision-making, which is directly tied to civic engagement. I think that is such a huge, crucial. And I'm just, you know, as I was reading that out loud, was thinking about ways that comes up in the work that young people do when working within our curriculum, whether that's working to build consensus or calling their elected official for the first time and kind of the butterflies that come with that. But yeah, I think that's crucial. Great. Well, I know it's about 2:40 right now. Definitely want to see if there's any final questions for Dinora. Happy to keep those coming, but so again, feel free to unmute, drop them in the chat. Really have loved this conversation, so don't want to cut it off, but want to see if there's any final thoughts or questions.
Thanks for an engaging conversation, Martin. I'm glad that I don't get to often talk to you this way. So
yeah,
talk about all the things we talk about inside GC with a bigger audience. So I will bow out gracefully from here and pass it over to you and Jess to continue the conversation.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you, Denoy. I appreciate it.
Bye, everyone.
Bye. All right. Well, yeah, so that's, I think, a great segue. We've been speaking a lot about it, but want to kind of certainly address as a next step, thinking about how all of this connects to what we refer to as action civics. So we've been talking a lot about civics education. What does it mean when you put the word action in front of it? You know, action civics is really the heart of Generation Citizen, and the curriculum that we use to work with educators. So, you know, we'll start off with just kind of doing a quick overview of what even is action civics. The working definition that we have is a student-centered experiential practice in which young people learn about the political process by taking action on specific issues in their community. So we're going to spend you know, pretty much the rest of this session reviewing what is action civics, how does it work inside schools and inside classrooms, and what could that potentially mean? How could you maybe take some of these skills or resources that we have to share and bring them into your own communities? You know, I think kind of highlight one of the points that that somebody brought up earlier, but this idea of, you know, bringing in things that are important, but if there are, you know, requirements that are either unrealistic or non-sustainable, there's no point in them. So really thinking about how these things can be ingrained into the state level, into school communities in a way that both obviously is important, but I think I want to say more importantly, sustainable and makes sense for educators and for students. Because, you know, a great requirement is nothing if there's not a great way to support the implementation of the requirement. So at GC, we really think, not really with the requirement lens, but really thinking about how can we support educators both through resources and through programs, staff support, to make sure that this type of work is both sustainable for the educators and done in a way that makes civic education real and engaging and meaningful. So I'm going to quickly just review, we've been talking a lot about Action Civics and kind of what it is, but would love to spend some time to really think about what actually happens when implementing Action Civics in a classroom. So broad picture, Action Civics typically is implemented over the course of a semester with a group of students. And as they go through this process, we'll just, in addition, want to highlight that what we do is, as a program staff, we work on providing coaching, professional development, and training for teachers as they implement this curriculum. But inside the classroom, it looks like these very clear 3 steps. In the first step, students are debating and building consensus around a specific issue that personally affects them and their community. So going back to what we were discussing earlier, students are really asked what do you care about, B, what does your community care about, and are able to bring that into the classroom and elevate it in a way that can lead to meaningful action. In the second step, students are analyzing the underlying root causes of their issue and collaborating with their teachers to develop an action plan to address the issue. So the main way of thinking about this issue is, we certainly, if you've landed on a specific issue, whether that's something as large as homelessness or food insecurity or something more school specific, you know that it's an issue. That's what the students have chosen. This step is more about figuring out, why is it happening? So what they're doing is asking not just, we know it exists, but why does it exist? So that's what we call root cause analysis. So students are looking at the systems that are in place that affect their lived experiences in their communities. So after step 2, what students have done with their teacher is have created an actual action plan. And Jessica is going to go in more and speak to this in actually more rooted detail that speaks to what it actually looks like, but create an action plan that can be implemented. Step 3 is, I think, to me, one of the most exciting parts, because it's when students go from, talking about the issues and talking about plans to actually doing it. Within this work, what we see is students using that plan that they've created and putting it into action. We traditionally end the semester with a civics day where students are able to present their work to public officials, classmates, community members. That will certainly look a little bit different this year with the way that human interaction has shifted over the past 6 months. But the main goal of step 3 is that students are taking real action, but beyond that, also reflecting on their work with the next step goal of, what does this actually mean for their sustained civic engagement, and what we like to call their civic engagement journey. So we really think about what's on this slide through the framing of basically a 10-week semester or unit, or however you want to frame it. But educators are really looking at connecting their students with not only understanding how does democracy work by who are our local elected officials, how do we get in touch with them, what roles do different officials or departments play in our lives, but then also looking at their own role as students. So yes, I know how the government is set up, but I also am having a better understanding of my role within that, specifically as it relates to creating change within the government. And we know that a lot of schools bring in, whether it's through community service clubs or whatever the case may be. A lot of times, students are already doing creating action to improve their communities. So this slide I really want to highlight as what is it that makes Action Civics unique. The example that we like to use for this is that, let's say students are noticing that there's a dangerous street crossing in their neighborhood, and they want to do something about it. a community service project, you might see students volunteering as crossing guards before and after school. An education project might have students, put up flyers or go door to door to raise awareness about the issue. An art project, students might create makeshift street signs to draw attention to the problem. But in an Action Civics project, students are working within their government. So in this example, they might lobby the Department of Transportation and actually advocate to install a pedestrian interval signal at this dangerous intersection. This is actually an example from one of our classes a couple semesters ago, that actually they did all of these things. So as a part of their civics project, in their implementation plan, they were raising awareness so that the community knew about it. They were working within their school with their school crossing guards to kind of create some sort of buddy system, and they were also working to raise awareness of the issue. But at the end of the day, what really, when we think about Action Civics, what's crucial is that students, what we have up on in this orange box, is that integration of understanding government structures and branches, understanding the budget and budgeting processes, geography of their local community, their appointed officials and their names, and actually being able to reach out and get in touch with them. Or, and if they're not getting in touch with them, what do? You reach out again, and you kind of building up those skills. And then also the idea of timelines for decision making. I think one thing that we want to make sure our students know is that change can often take a long time to happen. We frame civics projects as being happening over the course of a semester, and if it were that easy to make change in the course of 3 months or so, the world certainly would look like a lot of a different place. So acknowledging too that at the end of the day, and Jessica is going to speak to this as well, but at the end of the day, it's about more than just did they achieve their goal or not. So making sure that that there's time to reflect on that as well. So I just gave a very broad overview of what is Action Civics, why is Action Civics, and then I think I will now pass it over to Jessica to really speak about what does this look like in more granular detail.
Thanks, Martin.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. So right now we're going to be jumping in a little bit into the curriculum to talk about Action Civics and what that looks like in practice. And this is our advocacy hourglass. And this is just like a really great way to think about the semester in terms of planning and what it's going to look like. And, we're going to go over some strategies and actions that, hopefully you'll be able to take into your classroom. So this is our advocacy hourglass. And basically throughout this process, students are brainstorming community issues and really, sorry, I get distracted by the chat, but thanks, Jessica. So students are going to be identifying concerns of the community that they care about. And like we said before, this, is more than likely local, but it can also be state. But just in terms of community, we're thinking about, where they live or, surrounding neighborhoods. And then next, they're going to go through a process of consensus building. And that's where they're going to talk about, as a class, they're going to really narrow in on the problem and really identify what community issue they want to focus on for the semester. From that point, they're going to then determine what are the, what's the systemic root cause, or why is this issue happening on a systemic level? And, that is where a lot of, that's where they'll start to do PAR, participatory action research, to really dig into the systemic issues related to the problem. And then from that moment, they're then going to decide what to advocate for. So we'll jump into that a little bit so you can kind of get an idea of, we'll have several classroom examples of what this looks like more specifically, but they're going to, as a class, decide what goal they want to achieve by the end of the semester. And again, just to reiterate what Martin said, this is change is not an overnight thing. It takes time. And so it's always nice to, see changes happen, but we also, realistically understand that this process is not so much so about accomplishing a goal, but also keeping in mind a civic mindset and disposition, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then, excuse me, in order to accomplish the goal that's set, right, students are going to say, okay, who are the decision makers and influencers in my community, council members and leaders and the experts in this field that can help to move the needle on this specific focus issue. And then lastly, they're going to determine what strategic activities or tactics that would be helpful to make the change that they want to see. And please, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat as it relates to the hourglass. And so these are some of the issues that our students have worked on within previous semesters. And so just taking a really quick look at some of the issues that you see within your own school community. What are some issues that you think may come up in your classroom, or that students would be excited or interested in researching and working on? So if you can just like write that in the chat, I'm interested to see. And a lot of these issues are, they're pretty heavy, and they are, they definitely require a lot of time. And I see mental health. Thank you. Food insecurity, mental health issues, mental health and anxiety. And I think that, given the last couple of months, I think that it definitely, the issues that may come up correlate to the time that we're in. And so L students, yes, thank you. Drug abuse, yeah, all of these things, thank you. Abortion, yes. Yeah, I see a lot of similarities here. And so I think that it's, having had the opportunity to be in the classroom with students and to hear some of the topics that they're interested in, they really get excited when they get to talk about and, make changes on things that they care about. And I think that's what makes Action Civics so like special, if you will, is because it's student focused, student led, and it really gets them to take ownership over issues in their communities. And so now we're going to look into just different project examples that we've had over the semester. And so one class that we worked with focused on gentrification in their community. And one of the goals that they decided to work on was how to advocate to pass a bill for how to advocate for passage of a bill package advocating for protections in rent stabilized housing. So their focus issue was gentrification. More specifically, they wanted to see what bills had already been established that protected rent stabilized housing, because they saw that as something that was being attacked, or something that was something that was wrong, or community members and residents of their communities saw this as an issue, right? Then we have the second focus issue of school attendance. And the goal for this class was getting a new bus stop near the school to increase access to buses for students. And we've actually seen this topic in a couple of different classes. For students that live like in Queens or in the Bronx, these are real issues that they personally have been affected by, not being able to get to school on time, or also not having, not being able to participate in after school activities because the buses don't work after a certain, well, not don't work, but they're not able to get home by a certain time. And so, it's these project examples really just focus on the needs for the student need for these issues to be addressed, right? Lastly, the focus issue here was replacing old or broken school electronics, and this is a class that I worked with in Queens as well. And their goal was to reallocate allocate budget funds to fix and replace broken lights and smart boards. And so this was something that they saw. This was actually a senior class, I believe, and they have been working on this for a while before they started GC, and it was something that they were really passionate about, and they actually got the support of the principal. And when by the end of the semester, they had already had a plan with the principal to make sure that they had set aside some budget funds to make sure that they replace some of the equipment and things in the school. So this is like real, Action Civics is a just real opportunity and way for students to really lift their voices and feel empowered to make changes. Thanks, Martin. Another example, and just looking at it in terms of on the hourglass, is students in a high school in the Bronx identified youth employment as an issue, right? And so then they decided, okay, we see that we have a lack of internship and other opportunities for students in the school community, but also in the surrounding community. And then after doing research, they found out that there were so many age restrictions by law that didn't allow students below a certain age to have a job, and therefore they couldn't work. And so one of their goals was to increase the access and visibility to youth employment opportunities. So through their research, they were able to identify this goal as something that they could work on for the remainder of the semester. And in order to accomplish the goal, they decided to reach out to the District 10 superintendent, Councilman Richie Torres, and also their school administrators and teachers. And some of their tactics to getting this done was they compiled research within the school building to get a sense of like what other students were feeling that, maybe weren't in the class, but had ideas about how they could increase visibility for job opportunities. And then they, compiled the research, and they were able to put up a bulletin board in the school, and students created a committee to make sure that every month internship opportunities and job opportunities were made visible to students. And they also we're looking at starting a TA role position to kind of like help students who needed money or that needed job experience, etc. Thanks, Martin. Okay, so some of the benefits of Action Civics. So Action Civics really develops a sense of collaboration, because students are, working together throughout this process. Civic literacy and critical thinking and problem solving skills and public speaking. So there's so many, different benefits that they will have accomplished throughout this process. Then, of course, it meets multiple content standards on the state and county level, as well as this being a project-based learning. They're learning by doing, and they become more confident and comfortable with certain skills as they do it throughout the semester. And lastly, is student-centered instruction. So they are, again, with the support of the teacher and also myself and Martin, really just making sure that they have the tools and the research articles. And that's where a lot of our support comes in as well, when thinking about like research articles and opportunities for students to dig in during PAR. We have, we're here to support throughout that process as well, and thinking about different ways to support in making sure that like students have the resources that they need to accomplish the goal. Thanks, Martin. Okay, so now this again, this is the civic learning goals. And so just if you could take a look at it and, go over it. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. But this is really important, more important than, again, accomplishing a goal. It's really important to think about the long-term benefits of, the action civics pedagogy, and it's just how students are able to understand government and, the process of voting, and also how they're able to take action beyond the classroom, right? And making sure, like, the civic skills that come along with doing action civics, organizing and working in groups and considering respectfully responding to different beliefs, and, having accountable talk. And lastly, the government influences. These are all statements that we hope students will be able to leave with after the semester. Thank you, Martin. Okay, so this is researchers have identified 3 civic metrics above as the best predictors of students' like long-term civic engagement. And the first one is, we measure students' growth on these indicators through a variety of methods, right? So the data, for example, 76% of students gain civic knowledge over the course of the program. And this is from our 2017-2018 surveys. 70% of GC students believe they have power to make a difference in their communities. And lastly, students' interest in engaging in civic activities increased, and 47% increase in contacting or getting in contact with local legislators and community leaders and experts. And so all of these really demonstrate the increase of civic knowledge, civic skills, civic motivation, or agency, and those are the things that students are able to leave with after they complete action civics.
Great, thank you, Jess. I appreciate it. And really just kind of giving an overview of what actually happens over the course of a semester of action civics, but also more importantly, why is it important? I think going back to the slide of civic knowledge, skills, and dispositions, like when we think about the why this work is happening, it's really all kind of summed up here in terms of how students are leaving with the experiences, the beliefs, the mindsets to move forward with their own civic engagement journey. But we'll also speak really quickly to, I know we have, about 10 minutes left. I want to leave a little bit of time for any questions that you might have, but I just want to quickly highlight some of the resources that we have. Obviously, we've been speaking a lot about our Action Civics curriculum, which, as mentioned earlier, we see as really important that it is paired with support from program staff, both as it relates to training, professional development, and that ongoing support for educators, so that as we ask teachers and communities to navigate local politics, that they're not doing it on their own. Building an understanding of how your local government works, or how complex issues like food insecurity or mental health. A lot of you brought up really complex issues in terms of issues that your students might be interested in. We don't expect anybody to be experts on those, so kind of seeing support happening through that way as well. But another thing I wanted to highlight is something that we're really excited about, that actually officially launched a reboot 2 days ago of our Beyond the Ballot initiative. So I'm going to take a few minutes just to really quickly speak about that. But if you go to gobeyondtheballot.org, I'll type that into chat, so you can just kind of click right in. But gobeyondtheballot.org is something that we actually created about 4 years ago, initially as a way for young people to really engage in elections and the election process. But we've rebooted it, Go Beyond the Ballot 2.0, and this, the point of it is to encourage sustainable participation in 3 different ways. So one focuses on registering voters, so especially young voters, first-time voters, so going through the registering actual voters themselves. There's also creating and sharing resources with educators and caregivers to help them educate their students and family members about elections and community engagement. And then also encouraging students can take steps to encourage communities to take civic action leading up to, during, and after the election. So if you go to this website, everything that I've spoken to really kind of falls into 4 different things that we call our civic action toolkits, is one of them. There's also a policymaker guide, election specific resources, and then we have a lot of lessons and family guides. So we'll just quickly kind of speak to each of those. The Civic Action Toolkit is actually going to be rolled out weekly. So there's 9 weekly themes, each with 5 daily civic actions. So this toolkit is really used in an idea of how to develop not just a moment of civic action, but more of a civic routine. Civic action is never a one in, like, I did this thing, I'm done, I've done my civic duty. Certainly voting is a civic duty, but wanting to open up that idea of what does it actually mean to have a civic duty or civic responsibilities? How does that go beyond voting or go beyond the ballot? And then also there's something that we call our policymaker guide. And this really does work to help young people see the value of government, specifically as it relates to their local government and how they can actually take work or do work in contacting and reaching out to their local representatives to really elevate issues that they care about, that's also thinking about how young people can participate. You might not be able to participate by voting, but you can by ensuring that your elected officials know what you care about and know what ideas you have on making change. And then also, we've really curated a set of election-specific resources that are made by amazing partners that we've worked with that kind of highlight ways to just engage around the election. In addition to a section of family guides that are actually really created we initially created them to support virtual learning, but see as super relevant to this time as well. But again, that's something that there's a lot of resources on there, and just, within the theme of wanting to make sure we leave with something that all educators could use, take back, look, to bring back to their own schools and their own communities. Wanted to make sure that we spent a few minutes speaking to that. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left, so just want to open it up to any questions that any of you might have. I know Jess and I and Denora shared a lot of information during this time as it relates to civic readiness, Action Civics, Generation Citizen, or any resources. So definitely want to hit that pause button if anybody has any questions or any further comments or thoughts. I would love to hear from you right now. So again, feel free to unmute yourself or just drop it into the chat. We'll monitor that as well.
Just wanted to say thank you again, Martin and Jessica, and pass a thank you on to Denora as well. Mm-hmm. I had a question just about, because I'm familiar, very familiar with your work, but I'm always had a question about like timelines. Like when you go into work with a district, does it just vary, or is it like you come in once a week or once a month, or it just varies like depending upon the district commitment?
Great question. So it really is a conversation. We certainly have suggestions in terms of like what works best. But we've really worked with districts in a lot of different ways to, make sure that what we have and what we are able to provide actually make sense for them and their school communities. I would say the most common ways of implementing are definitely over the course of a semester, but how it's rolled out can look a little bit different. I'd say most often it's implemented twice a week. If they're doing it in conjunction with like a participation in government class, a lot of times teachers, obviously see the connections with Generation Citizen and decide to implement it twice a week over, that course of 10 weeks. We also have schools who say, I think I'd actually much rather do it in a more of a condensed timeline, and they do it every single day for, 4 or 5 weeks. Both have their merits. I think when you think about implementing quickly, building that momentum, what you did on Monday, you're picking up on Tuesday, you're doing on Wednesday, which is great. But also one of the benefits of doing it a little bit more drawn out is that, you have more time in between each work. So if I'm reaching out to an elected official, they have a few days to respond to me. So like kind of, the nuts and bolts of it, helps that form. But all of that to say is part of what we do is, understand that within any type of, curriculum or education system, it's never going to be one size fits all, but we're happy to share our own expertise around what works and make sure that it does fit with what's possible for schools and for districts. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And I think that actually kind of relates to the question that Virginia put in the chat. Do you visit school districts to explain the programs you have? We definitely do. Traditionally, we love to visit schools and districts in person. That's certainly been through virtual or through video chat or calls. But yeah, really part of what we love to do is really work with schools, work with districts to not only explain our work, but also make sure that we are able to share how it could potentially fit into, again, to Jessica's point, how it could potentially fit into all the many things that happen inside of a school, and make sure that it's done in a sustainable way. Like the last thing we want is to, forge a partnership that either isn't done so in a sustainable way, where you're asking teachers to either do too much or do things that don't make sense for their work, or that they don't feel supported to do so. So that's crucial to any partnership that we have, are those conversations. Well, I know we are just at about time, so I'll leave us. We always have, us speaking. I always want to leave kind of sharing a student's perspective, because at the end of the day, that's who this is about. So I want to just read a quote from our last actually in-person civics day. We always have student change maker awards. This is a quote from one of our change makers, and her name was Blessing. This says, "Normally people wouldn't consider students fit for this type of work. But if we don't, who will? We as young Americans have so much potential and power. If we just stand off to the side, keeping our thoughts to ourselves, or isolated in our classrooms and letting things proceed as they are, nothing will change." So I think this quote really speaks to the power of civic engagement and action civics. So I will stop talking. I will leave it with that, leave it with Blessing's ideas. But also wanted to put our emails, all of our social and internet information as well. If you have any questions or anything that you'd like to share with us, or anything that you want to further discuss, whether it be about questions or about Beyond the Ballot, whatever the case may be, please feel free to follow up. Our emails are up on the screen. Really has just been great speaking with all of you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you
so much.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. I appreciate your time.
Likewise. Okay. All right, everyone. So we will head back into the main room. Thank you again to Generation Citizen. Wonderful and really valuable tools to work with as we, again, push our work forward. So feel free, take that little stretch break, and then we'll head back in the main room.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.